lead a hike to view and discuss beech leaf disease in the field. And beech leaf disease is relatively new to our area. It can damage and eventually kill both ornamental and native beech trees. And our plan is to meet at Legacy's Shatter Preserve and then carpool to some roadside parking at their nearby Creek's Head Preserve. And this event is free, but registration is required because we're trying to limit the number of attendees to make sure that we have an enjoyable field experience for everyone. So I think Drew is also going to put a link to that in the chat. And next, I would like to introduce the WCCD's outreach coordinator, Drew Mark Wilson.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Drew Mark Wilson, the outreach coordinator. And what that means is I coordinate and I create a lot of the content that you will see on some of these screens. I make a lot of promotional material and I coordinate volunteers for our programs and events. Tonight, I'll be assisting with any technical issues that arise and tracking any new questions submitted via the Q&A button for our panelists. So some housekeeping notes. All attendees are on mute and are not visible during this presentation. Tonight, we will be focusing on questions that attendees submitted when they registered for the event. We've tried to group and combine similar questions. If you have any new questions, open the Q&A window, should appear at the bottom of your screen, where you can submit questions to us. I've seen a few people figured that out already, so thank you. We will try to answer those throughout the webinar. If we're not able to get to those due to time, we will hopefully answer those similar questions during the whole webinar. So like I said, we will reply to you in the Q&A window live to our presenters if the time allows. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared on our YouTube channel. I'll share that link in the chat right now.
Awesome. Thank you, Drew.
Absolutely.
So next, I want to introduce our panelists. So our first panelist is Julie Stahesky, and Julie owns Site Specific Inc., a company providing arboriculture, horticulture, and turf grass consulting services for a variety of clientele, including golf courses, cemeteries, municipalities, commercial, and residential landscapes. And Julie has been an ISA certified arborist for 30 years. She holds the tree risk assessment qualification and is also a Michigan Oak Wilt qualified specialist and a past president of ISA Michigan. So thank you for being here, Julie.
Glad to be a part of the panel. Thanks.
And next we have Josh Leo. Josh is also an ISA certified arborist since 2005, and he has an associate's degree in applied science for horticulture from Oakland Community College. And at Davey Tree, Josh has been a climber, a trimmer, landscaper, plant health care technician, lawn care technician, sales arborist, assistant district manager, and now currently a regional business developer. Woo, Josh, what a list.
Thank you. 20 years, got a list going, so yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here. It's great to have you as part of the panel.
Absolutely.
So next we have Carl Burhop. Burhop Forestry Consulting is a privately owned forestry consulting firm that assists private landowners with forestry management. And Carl has a bachelor's of science in forestry and natural resources and is a registered forester in the state of Michigan. Working as an agent for the landowner, Carl provides the following services based on the landowner's goals: writing forest management plans, timber sale preparation and administration, timber appraisals, and timber basis. And thank you, Carl, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Very exciting. Had to come out of the woods.
Yeah, no, it's great to get you guys all in one space, even if it's virtual.
Yep.
So lastly, we have Jason Darling. Jason graduated from MSU Forestry in 2008 and is a registered forester in the state of Michigan and has worked for a large private forestry consultant in the UP, along with various government agencies such as the U.S. Forest Service and the Michigan DNR. And Darling Forestry LLC was established in 2013 to provide sustainable forestry consulting and land management to landowners throughout Southern Michigan. So thank you, Jason, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so now what all of our attendees have been waiting for, we're moving on to our main event. So as mentioned, I will be starting with the previously submitted attendee questions, and we're going to just see how far we get. We had a lot of great questions come in. We actually had 91 people sign up for this webinar, so you can imagine we have a lot of questions to get through. As a reminder to panelists, I'm going to read through all of the questions on a slide. Some of them I've tried to group together so that hopefully you can maybe answer a few of them if they're related. And then please raise your hand, either your real hand or your virtual hand, if you'd like to respond, and I'll call on you so that hopefully we're not talking over each other too much. And I know this feels a little bit like a game show, but there are no points here and you are all winners. So don't be intimidated. It's going to be great. All right. So now we're gonna roll through with our first question. So this is kind of the whole premise of our panel talk tonight. What is the difference between an arborist and a forester, and which should you call and when? All right, Josh, take it away. Start us off.
Yeah, so I'll answer on the arborist part of it, but I believe all of us on the panel would agree that arborists and forestries, they kind of cross a little bit, you know, especially when it comes to specific, you know, tree issues and diseases and what's better for an area. But in my opinion, what an arborist would basically be is a person who specializes in the care of trees and shrubs and how to handle those on maybe smaller parcels of land, residential or commercial property, even as far as municipalities and some government agencies as well. You know, to be able to manage and take care of the trees in those areas. Whereas in forestry, which you'll hear from these foresters talk here in a few seconds, they'd be on larger tracts of land, and what would be better for that and taking, you know, the natural materials that are there and maybe doing some specialty removals to better the land as itself. So but there's still some crossing there, but you know, I feel like that kind of answers that question a little bit. So
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. Yeah, Carl, toss it over to you.
So I'll talk about the foresters a little bit. As far as Jason and I go, we're self-employed folks. We work for landowners, help them think about their goals for their property and their woodlots and what they want to accomplish with that. Timber is not always the main goal. It can be recreation, could be wildlife, could be pollinator habitat and such. So a big part of what we do is talk to our clients and establish what their goals and objectives are for their property, and then see what makes sense on the site and help them work their way through that.
Great. Thank you, Carl. Yeah, Julie, over to you.
Just to add another layer to each of those excellent explanations, I think I see an arborist being able to look at individual trees and provide individual recommendations, whether it's for pruning, for some sort of pest management or health or nutritional issue. And yet we can make individual tree recommendations, and our goals tend to be perpetuating the health of and longevity of those trees where they stand. But arborists tend to inherit a lot of tree issues that have been brought into modified environments. And so a lot of our work is dealing with modified areas and properties, and we're dealing with often nursery grown, and trees that have been planted. And that brings in a whole host of issues that we'll probably get to later in this evening's presentation. But arborists can also look at populations of trees, whether that's municipal citywide scale that they're managing. I do a lot of work with cemeteries, which can be 40 to 100 acres. But we're still, in a lot of golf properties too, we're still managing individual trees, but sometimes populations of individual trees that are going to get specific recommendations per stem, if you will. So I think that might be a little bit different than the forester's larger perspective, taking the whole ecosystem and the wildlife and recreational things involved with, a stand of trees in that regard. So I see arborists dealing with trees that are often in environments that include people and infrastructure, and those tend to be modified settings, which again brings a lot of challenges for trees. So
Yeah, thank you, Julie. That was an excellent addition to kind of further parse apart kind of when you might want an arborist or a forester. Jason, would anything you'd like to add?
No, I think we're good on this one.
All right, perfect. We'll move on to the next one.
It does feel a bit like Jeopardy or something.
Sorry, folks. I was trying the old spacebar mute button trick, and I zoomed us through our presentation. So now you're gonna have to close your eyes. Don't get sick. We're gonna have to go back. Okay, here we are. So the next one, are credentials important? And if so, what should you look for? All right, Jason, over to you.
Yeah, I'll, speaking from the consulting forester point of view, there are a few good credentials to look for, and obviously Carl and I hold most of them, so obviously we think they're important. Otherwise, we wouldn't spend our time and money on maintaining them. But the first one is the Michigan Registered Forester. It's through the state of Michigan who maintains that credential in the database. So you have to have a 4-year forestry degree, and you have to maintain a certain number of continuing education credits to be in good standing. And that actually, we do have numbers associated with that. So if there was ever an issue that a private landowner or whoever comes across with a Michigan Registered Forester, you can actually issue a complaint, and there is a board there to review those complaints and bring you some sort of recommendations or resolutions there. Another little higher level credential that Carl and I have is through the Association of Consulting Foresters. It's a little more specific to our profession and what we do as consultants. Again, pretty good rigorous training and continuing education credits that you have to have, 4-year degree, so many years of experience. So that's kind of the higher level credential that we work towards in the private forestry consulting world.
Great, thank you, Jason. Julie, over to you.
I really liked how Jason mentioned the continuing education credits, because with most industry professions and qualifications and certifications, that continuing education is a key component, which keeps us current on the latest recommendations, latest research outcomes, the new pests that continuously are hitting our radar, right? So in the arborist world, there are very complementary certifications that Jason just mentioned. Our global credentialing agency for arboriculture is called the International Society of Arboriculture. And there's the certified arborist, which same thing, you have to have certain education and years of experience before you can even apply to take the exam. And then once certified, you do, it is continuing education credits to maintain. Within that umbrella, there's other multiple credentials and specialties that can be achieved. And then a parallel group we also have, similar to the foresters, is called the Association of Consulting Arborists. And again, very specific on scope of work and reports, and often involved with litigious kind of situations. So very similar things, and definitely concur. Credentials are very valuable in parsing through. Just this past month, I've had 2 people come to my front door asking to do work in my yard. The first person couldn't tell me the difference between a maple, an oak, and a walnut. And it was high risk season for oak wilt infections. And that person, just needless to say, they got quite an education and they were quite anxious to leave. So there are a lot of people out there that present themselves as a professional, and there isn't much depth in their knowledge. So be cautious.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. Any other comments on this question? All right, we'll move. Oh, Carl, did you have one? Yeah.
I just had one comment. The Society of American Foresters is our main group, but it includes all the foresters, either state, federal, and consultants. So it provides a network and allows us to know a lot of folks, and those folks refer us and such. So it's also another layer of protection potentially for a landowner. If you're referred from a state forester as a consultant, it's also a good recommendation.
Great, thank you all. All right, let's see. I try to just move one slide ahead this time. All right. So the next question is there a charge for an initial consultation visit? And if so, what is the average cost for the Southeast Michigan area? Josh, take it away.
Yeah, so I can say that on the arborist side of it, working with Davey, there is no charge for an initial consultation. Anytime a resident or a homeowner reaches out to us to come out and look at a tree or a shrub or a lawn issue, that initial visit is a no charge for that. Now, the only time where there could potentially be a charge is if there was a tree inventory that was required for a site. A lot of times that there will be a little charge for that, just because there is some data that needs to be entered, and then somebody has to compute it and then put it into mapping and that type of stuff for a homeowner. But other than that, most of these are going to be initially upfront as a no charge. So.
Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, as far as myself personally, as a forestry consultant, I tried to do my best to provide, 1 hour free site visits, is if you're within 30 miles of my kind of home territory in Mason here. And once it gets beyond that or further away, I start to typically charge hourly for those services. And occasionally, depending on what type of project is taken on beyond that, sometimes I can kind of absorb that initial cost into a bigger project down the road, but typically do charge unless you're really local to me for a site visit. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And Julie, I think you were next.
Sure. I'm aware of several different business models, and they can range from free work estimates if the property owner knows specifically, I need this tree pruned and I need this tree removed. Oftentimes that is a free estimate. However, when you get into doing diagnostic work, or tree risk assessments. That's another several layers of technicality. And that requires more in-depth knowledge and resources and time. So I'm seeing anywhere from $100 to $150 to $250 for the first hour on site, if you're getting into those sorts of things. And then when we get involved with more complex problems, such as diagnosing oak wilt and then developing oak wilt management plans, those are definitely for fee projects, because they are quite involved and require a significant level of technical acuity to figure those out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Carl, I think your hand went up as well.
Yeah, I think it varies depending on what the service is that is being requested. If it's a timber sale and they've had a bunch of timber buyers out to give them quotes on the timber, I'm generally going to charge to come out, because I'm going to go out there and see that the woodlot has been marked many different ways and many different prices are being thrown around. And if they're just looking for me to give them a free appraisal, I can't afford to do that. So if I do charge something up front, I do end up providing another service, I will credit that initial upfront charge against future charges. So, but it really depends on what they're asking.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think, basically when we went through the introductions and I read off, all of you have, credentials out the wazoo, really. You have lots of big skill set that you've built over time. So, you kind of pay for what you get. And maybe the person that came to Julie's door was willing to give a free estimate, but they might not really have the knowledge or background to do a good job. So really, I like to remind people that trees are an investment, and it's worth putting a little bit of money into your tree to make sure that it stays there in your yard for the next 50, 100 years. So yeah, I hear where you all are coming from. I definitely try to encourage people to think long-term about their trees, and don't just always go with the maybe more budget or cheaper option. All right, so we'll move on to the next one. Where can I find arborists and foresters that service my area? Josh, over to you.
Yeah, so there's a few different sites that you could check out. So, one of them would be the isa-arbor.com. I believe that's one of the links that may be shared with you all. Then ISA Michigan also has one. It's isamichigan.org. And then just a self-promotion here, Davey.com, you can find an arborist that services your local area. And normally they can schedule a visit within about 24 to 48 hours. You can normally have a scheduled visit for an arborist to come out to your home or your commercial site to take a look at whatever you have going on. So, and then there's a plethora of other options as well. And also the demons of Google, you could get on there and take your chances as well. But the first couple that I mentioned there, those are the important ones where you could get a reputable company out to look at and service your property.
Great, thank you.
Those links should be available in the chat as well.
Awesome, thank you, Drew. Carl.
I think all the organizations that Jason and I mentioned are good. I know the Association of Consulting Foresters website provides a list of the foresters that work in certain areas and such, and your local conservation district office, they know who works in the area. We write plans through the NRCS and conservation district, so that's also a good way to find someone.
Yeah, thank you, Carl, for mentioning us. I sometimes forget to toot our own horn, but yes, we have contractor lists and we are happy to share those. So if people want to email me or email Drew or email info@washtenaw.cd.org, we can get back to you. And they're also available on our website. So if we're trying to update them. I think they are a little bit old at current state. But yeah, we're always happy to chat with people and try to get them connected to an appropriate contractor that they can build a relationship with and work with.
They
Drew.
should be up to date.
We're working on it. They're working on it. Yeah. Anybody else? I guess we covered that pretty thoroughly, so we'll keep rolling. We got a lot to get through. So the next kind of couple of questions: how do I maximize the health of my forest? And is some strategic cutting good for the forest? Jason, go ahead and start us off.
I guess keep it. This could be the whole hour conversation if we wanted it to be. So I'll just hit the high point that I like to preach or talk about with my clients is, we've all experienced with oak wilt and emerald ash borer and some of these other, root rot diseases. And I just really try to preach for a forest is a diverse forest in species, in age, in structure. Just preach diversity. Don't get caught in monoculture systems or only promoting one species over another for timber value or wildlife value. Try and just be as diverse in all aspects as you can, is a good quick starting point for what I preach is what a healthy forest can be. And that is dead and living. Some dead standing trees and dead down trees is also very acceptable. A lot of people, I'm generalizing, but when they see, wood on the ground, they think it's going to waste or their woods is decrepit or something like that. And it's all good. It's all part of a healthy system. And then very quickly, the strategic cutting is definitely good for the forest if done correctly with the appropriate, species selection, tree selection, time of year when you're going to be doing the cutting. The best laid plan can be foiled if you're cutting at the wrong time, whether it be oak wilt or it's too wet or sometimes you do want some soil disturbance to get different species to grow. So depending on what your objectives are, yes, strategic cutting is good, but the key is strategic in that question and answer. So that's a quick answer for those two for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason.
Good answer. Yep.
Yeah, Carl, did you want to add anything to
I
that?
was just saying that was a good answer.
Okay. All right. We'll keep making headway if we don't have any hands popping up. All right. So actually this kind of maybe dovetails into what we just talked about because Jason was really hitting home diversity. Invasive species technically add diversity to a forest, but they're probably not the diversity that we want. So these questions are all about invasive species. What resources can I use to learn how to identify invasive species? Why is prevention and control early on important? And where can I find information on removal for DIY or contractors who will do the work? Carly, threw your hand up.
Sure. So, I mean, to identify the invasive species, you should call your local consultant in the woodlot and certainly can help you out identifying that. Late in the season, when most of the plants don't have leaves, the invasives usually still have their leaves. Why is it important to control them early on? Because it's much easier to control them early on versus when it gets out of hand and becomes a real issue. As far as information from contract, where the contractors are, again, your conservation district offices are going to have all those contractors lists.
Yes, I'm glad you brought us up again. Yep, we've got a list of contractors that do invasive species removal work. So we can definitely share those with people. They're on our website, but feel free also to reach out to us. Julie, it looked like you unmuted. Did you want to add something?
Well, simply there's the Michigan Invasive Species Information Network. And I say it real slowly because the acronym is MISIN, and it's available as a website, but also as an application. And so if you're spotting something in the field, you can actually take a picture of it and report it, something that may be unique or an early detection, which is very valuable because that goes back to a state managed database that gets response. And then we also have, in addition to the Michigan State University Extension offices, as well as the conservation districts, right, that Carl mentioned, again, I'll say it slowly because they go by the acronym, but the CISMAs, Cooperative Invasive Species Management Areas, and there are multiple clusters geographically located throughout the state. And those are excellent resources for dealing with invasive species. But again, that MISIN site has quite a bit of information too for the do-it-yourselfers, the best time to cut, treat stumps, et cetera, and the products to use.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie. Yeah, just to add to that, our local SISMA is the Jackson Lenawee Washtenaw. And basically, if you Google JLW SISMA, you will probably find the website, but I think Drew probably can also drop it in the chat for everyone.
So I'm going to speak up again because I just saw in the chat box, Drew added the iNaturalist app, which is great. But I also, for the folks that are in the audience, I attended one of Summer's in-person sessions earlier this season. And one of my favorite takeaways was that I have an iPhone. And when I take a picture of something and look at my screen, if the I for the information has a little star by it, I can click on that or tap it on my phone, and the iPhone will try to identify what that picture is of, whether it's a mushroom or a tree leaf or a bird, any of those things. And so I've been playing with that recently, and it's pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's also pretty good for a quick, what is this?
Yeah, that is a great handy feature, just as technology continues to improve.
Yeah,
Yep.
and it was obviously free on your phone.
So before we move on, I wanted to also, one of kind of a specific question that was asked was about spongy moths. And they wanted to know, are you seeing spongy moths throughout Southeast Michigan? Are they occurring with more frequency or lasting longer? And then any recommendations for treatment?
I think we've been seeing them for the past 3 to 4 years, but I think they're starting finally to crash. And 2 nice short videos that are helpful, if you're not familiar with spongy moths to begin with, come out of one of our SISMAs, which is called the North Country SISMA. And they have 2 videos on spongy moth, both less than 2 minutes. So right to the point and very beneficial. One on the life cycle, and then the second one is on how to control. And they are more appropriate for individual trees for the control mechanisms and smaller properties, but very useful for getting your spongy moth biology figured out.
Great, perfect. Little homework to do after the panel talk. All right, we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so issues with oak trees. What is oak wilt and how do I prevent it? If I have it, what should be done? And then what is sudden oak death? And are there other common oak issues that we should be aware of? Julie, I see you chomping at the bit. I feel like you should just go for it. Run with it.
Okay, thank you. If Drew can put this in the chat, Michigan, spelled out oakwilt.org, is a collaborative website supported by what's called the Oak Wilt Coalition. And the coalition is made up of many, many types of stakeholders, everyone from individual tree care companies to the Michigan DNR, Michigan State University, Relief Michigan, our National Park Service in the state, and the utility companies even have a seat at the table. And we're all trying to address the best way to move forward with this natural resource crisis. So first, let's clarify what is sudden oak death, because that is a different pathogen. It is Phytophthora ramorum. And this is also, it's also known as SOD, S-O-D, sudden oak death. This is not, to my knowledge, in Michigan at this point. It is devastating on the West Coast and in other states, but to my knowledge, it's not been detected in Michigan. Maybe my forester friends on the panel can correct me if I'm not current on sudden oak death. So sudden oak death sounds like it's describing what oak wilt does, but it is an actual completely separate pathogen. And whereas oak wilt is a fungal pathogen, it's considered to be non-native and obviously invasive because our red oaks have no known immunities to them whatsoever. And the best way to prevent it, oak wilt moves in two ways. It moves overland, which creates new infection centers, and then it can also move through connected root systems, which actually takes out more trees than the initial overland infections do. So our best strategy with oak wilt is prevention. And so I love this question because to prevent it from initiating new infection centers, we have to avoid wounds that open up the sapwood to our native beetles that move the spores to those fresh wounds that they're attracted to. So prevention means doing your oak tree work during the time of year when we don't have a lot of spore mats from the disease that's reproducing, when we don't have active insect vectors, and when our trees are not susceptible. And I could go a lot longer than that, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, Carl.
So we talk about doing the work on oak trees at the appropriate times and such, but what I've been seeing more is a lot of storm damage in the woodlots, which creates that same situation. So I think maybe monitoring your woodlot is going to become more important over time here, to be out and checking on your trees. I do see it occasionally, but not very often in the woodlot. So I feel pretty lucky that I don't see it and don't have to deal with it, because it's not an easy issue and it's an expensive issue to deal with.
Right. But I like Carl's recommendation for monitor, because if we can catch a new infection that came from overland transmission, we have the best chance to address it without going too crazy with all the other more expensive interventions that need to happen once it gets into that root plate and into the root system. So yes, thank you, Carl, because monitoring is key.
Great. Yeah, I guess before we move on, I know, so there were actually several questions that were very specific, and that's why I kind of threw in the other common oak issues. So a few things that people mentioned that were happening with their oaks were cracking and splitting with more frequency, a pin oak with brownish leaves and black spots on one side, and young white oak leaves turning brown and curling. And I know there's probably many reasons why these things could be happening. It's probably not possible to diagnose just with a brief little kind of explanation of what's happening. But I'm just curious if there are other common issues happening with oaks that attendees should be aware of.
A lot of the things you mentioned are seasonal foliar fungi issues, and they're very dependent on the weather patterns at the time of leaf expansion, because that's when the vast majority of fungi cause fungal infections in our foliage. The white oak, actually, I think is a little easier to figure out sometimes. If they're cupping and curling, it could either be anthracnose, again, a spring issue. So when the additional growth occurs past spring, usually that new foliage is clear and less infected. So if you see initial bud break and those original foliage that first popped out in the spring, the ones that are all crusty, but new growth, nice and clean, you may be dealing with anthracnose. The other thing, though, that attacks white oaks quite a bit is called a cynipid gall wasp. And when it's a heavy infestation, it can cause the cupping and browning and even some leaf drop. But if you picked up an individual leaf, you can see very small individual bumps, and that would likely be cynipid gall wasp, and that's with the C. There's so many other things that do happen with oak. The cracking and splitting, the black spots, it's kind of hard to tell from just a conversation like this.
Yep. I feel like site visits are so important to see the context of what the tree's in and the situation and what's been happening, talking to the owner about how it's been managed or not managed over time. All of it can really play into what's happening with the tree. All right, well, we will keep moving. Whew. So if oaks are so problematic, why do we plant them? Why are native trees important? And in what circumstances may natives not be the best choice? Carl.
So in the woods, oaks are, if you're talking about timber, those are some of our more valuable species that produce veneer and sawlog products, lumber products. And they also provide a lot of mass for wildlife, especially the white oaks. The deer love the white oak acorns. So they do offer a lot.
Julie, you look excited to chime in again.
Totally concur, with Carl. We have a $24 billion timber industry here in the state of Michigan, and oak makes up a significant percentage of the canopy cover in our our both private and state managed and federally managed forests. So the ecosystem services, not only in those greater watershed areas, is invaluable to keeping our water clean and filtrated. But even when we get closer in to suburban and urban areas, oaks provide immense, as Carl was saying, mast in food for deer, but also they're one of the most biologically prolific trees that hold over 550 different species of moths and butterflies. So they are like an enormous buffet for our songbirds and any kind of bird that eat insect larvae that require larvae for feeding their, clutches of eggs hatching and to the point of fledging. So furthermore, the stormwater mitigation they provide, the particulate matter that they capture, it's all extremely critical in all environments, but especially in urban and suburban areas too. So they are worth planting.
Yeah, thank you for kind of broadening, and both of you, Carl and Julie, making that connection to the broader ecosystem and why oaks are important. And I want to plug that the WCCD did a talk with Doug Talamay and Mike Cost. I think it was, was it just earlier this year, Drew? Or was it okay.
Can you believe that?
Yeah,
I'll make sure to put that recording on as a link here.
Perfect. And they went into detail about oaks. So if you are interested in learning more about oaks, I definitely recommend going and checking out that video.
Yes, Dr. Doug Talamay out of University of Delaware. Fantastic.
All right. So what are some of the best forest management practices for protecting water quality and increasing biodiversity? Jason.
I guess I'll have my shot at this, but Yeah, again, kind of preaching, ways to make your forest diverse in age and species structure is one of the best forest management practices in general. And when you do get in, if you are interested in doing forest management, in regards to tree cutting, definitely keeping riparian management zones is what we call them, or buffers when you are working near water, especially if there's a slope associated with that area between the water source and the forest that you're actively managing. So maintaining a buffer zone to maintain the soil structure, the canopy structure. There can be work done in that riparian management zone. It isn't completely void of management, but definitely keep in mind, protecting a certain area away from, whether it's, a lake or flowing water. Maintaining that buffer. And then, increasing biodiversity. Again, if you have a diverse forest with age, species, and structure, really that's, the best way for increasing biodiversity, and what I see a lot in southern Michigan and northern Michigan a little bit is we have managed our woods almost solely with single tree selection. So you have very mature forests, and we don't have, at least in my opinion, as young forests, with shorter canopies, earlier successional species, aspen. We don't have much of that management down here. Again, that goes into a different conversation of markets that drive some of our management decisions. But just being open to maybe doing some different styles of cutting to get different age classes incorporated onto your property, not being afraid to do that type of management, as long as it is strategic and well planned, and everybody knows what the objectives are. So that could be one thing that we don't get to talk about a lot down here, because we don't have pulpwood or very good firewood markets where those maybe more aggressive cutting styles, earlier successional cutting styles are as frequent. So that's just something to consider.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. And I'm glad you brought up the riparian buffer zones. And I guess I'm kind of curious, is there a recommended width or is that dependent on the forest and also the water body that you're trying to protect?
Yeah, it depends. There is the Michigan BMP manual goes into detail as far as the type of species that you're managing, the slope associated with it, the type of water body. Typically a good rule of thumb is 100 feet. But then you get into vernal pools, intermittent creeks and drainages. Sometimes you can manage them when they're not flowing, ephemeral creeks. I've gone through different permitting processes for a designated trout stream versus a county drain. So it kind of depends which way. It helps to use someone that's knowledgeable of the BMP manual and other guidances when working around in forested areas near water.
Great. And I'm also curious if you and Carl, either of you, could talk about stream crossings with timber sales, and what do you need to do if a property owner has a stream that bisects their property and they want to harvest timber from both sides? Carl.
Well, certainly if you have to cross it, you have to protect the banks and the stream. And in my experience, it's best not to try and do that if you can, and try and find different routes to go away from the stream. That doesn't always happen. It's always nice to be friendly with your neighbors. So if you do need to remove something a different way that you can't get across the stream, that's helpful. But we have cross streams, and we use a lot of the crane mats But if there's a big flow in the water, the crane mats don't work well, and it's very challenging. We used to have real winters where you have good frozen ground. We don't have that anymore, so it's becoming more of an issue. So yeah, it's a challenge. It can be a real challenge.
Yeah, Jason, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I have gone through the permitting process with, well, DEQ or Eagle, whatever they want to call themselves. A lot of their old permits still say DEQ, to do a stream crossing. So, you can work through the permitting process. You got to do a bunch of measurements, fill out an application, and work with a local agent to get stuff approved. But yeah, with the development of, you go further north, they have, really impressive portable bridges, but you have to have enough timber available for management to make the cost of installing a bridge like that appropriate or worthwhile. So you can use crane mats too, but yeah, if you have no other option, you can use a consultant or do it yourself to go through the permitting process to cross flowing waterway.
Great. Thank you both, Carl and Jason. That's great. All right. So I think we're kind of staying in the same maybe forester centric area. So what's the general process for conducting a timber harvest? And why should I hire a forester to navigate that process? Should they be involved with every sale? Carl.
Yes.
Good, emphatic. Yeah.
It's just determining which trees are to be harvested is what keeps the woodlot healthy and the structure correct. And the consultant is working for the landowner. And there are many timber buyers out there. Most of them are great. They try and do the best they can, but they are not working for the landowner. They're working for the sawmill. So that would change a lot about what they mark in the woodlot. So money is always an issue on every sale. And if somebody tells you that money's not the issue, they just want their woodlot to be healthy, that's partially true. Money is always important. At least from my experience. So in order to get everybody looking at the same thing, someone has to mark those trees and inventory and put that into a prospectus. Bids are sent out to, I'm usually sending out to 20 mills. And depending on the timber, I'll get between 3 and 10 bids. So when it's bid competitively, even if it might not be the highest valued timber in the woodlot, bids are always strong. It's always the best way to market your trees. We of course charge a fee to handle those sales. I can't remember a time that it ever didn't pay off for the landowner to have a consultant in the middle of it. So most consultants will manage the sale as well, take it from beginning to end, provide the contracts, supervise the harvest, make sure the correct trees are being cut and removed from the site. So it's a full service administration service. Yeah.
Before Josh jumps in, I have kind of a follow-up question, or maybe I want to clarify if this is a good analogy. It sounded like maybe a forester and the timber buyer are kind of analogous to in a home buying process where you have a buyer's realtor and a seller's realtor, where one is working for you to try to get you the best, everything that you want, all of your objectives for your new home at the price that you need, versus the seller's realtors, doing the opposite for their party. I know I'm curious, does that kind of ring true for for what you guys were describing? To some
Yeah,
degree.
somewhat. Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, that seems the way that's what it appears to be. I mean, I would like to think that we have a lot more knowledge of the woodlot than.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply anything in terms of knowledge or skill set, but just more, yeah, your point of like, you want to have a forester because they're working for your best interests. So,
And and the woodlot.
and the woodlot, which hopefully is one of the landowner's interests.
Correct.
Great. Josh, over to you. What were you gonna?
Yeah, so just to piggyback off of what Carl and Jason do in the state of Michigan here, you know, on the flip side of that, unfortunately, the negative side of that, my family had an issue out of state, in the state of North Carolina, where my grandparents decided that they wanted to have some land clearing done, selective land clearing done, and unfortunately, wouldn't take the advice of hiring somebody, a forester or somebody like that, to come through and look at the plots of land. And it was a 110-acre farm, and they had somebody who somebody recommended come to the site, and it was supposed to be a selective clear, and they ended up clear cutting 10 acres of hardwoods and ended up just taking a huge amount of what could have been potential revenue down the road away from them by not following a forester's recommendations and having a reputable company come through and price it out for them accordingly. So now, unfortunately, that 10 acres is kind of wasted at this point, but we have since learned from that, and now they have a forester who's there, and they have a plan in place, and you know, I think they have a 10-year cycle in there right now where they're coming through and doing some selective cutting, and it is actually paying off for them to have that. And honestly, the fee that's being charged by the forester, it kind of offsets everything. So it's being managed, it's being done properly, the property looks good. So it's kind of a win-win all the way around when you go the right way. Sometimes going the cheaper route doesn't pay off. So and their property is a prime example of that. It was pristine hardwoods that hadn't been touched in 70, 80 years. And to have somebody come in and kind of mutilate the property, it feels like you've been robbed. So it's very, very important. And I know the reason I tell that story is nobody feels bad about what we went through, but as a learning lesson, don't just take any person off the street who says they have the credentials, ask for them, and you know, and they should be willing to provide it if they've earned them. So
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Josh. I definitely have heard from other landowners who have had similar experiences. Yeah, I think it's unfortunate when, you know, you could have spent maybe a smaller pot of money to hire the appropriate professional to do that work, but instead you decided not to, and then you end up hiring a lawyer at the end to try to maybe get back some of what you lost because the contract, you know, either you didn't have a contract or they didn't follow what was in the contract. Or so I agree. Yeah, again, that whole idea of investment, and you know, sometimes you need to put a little bit more in to take care of something and really make sure it's cared for to hopefully get more out in the end. So yeah, Jason, over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one quick more little tidbit here about the timber sale process. And, you know, one thing that happens a lot with some clients that contact me is some people get in a hurry, you know, or a timber buyer comes and knocks on the door and says, hey, I can offer you this much today. And maybe I'll get a call and they'll want it to happen. Well, at least, I don't know, I don't want to speak for Carl, but at least with me, it ends up being a little bit longer of a process. Sometimes it can be a really quick turnaround, but it takes a little bit of time for me to get you on my calendar, to get walk the woodlot, get it marked. Then it's usually sold on we bid it out, that takes a month. Then we put on a year to multi-year purchase agreement. So it takes time to get the right people involved, where some people are a little deceived or maybe inappropriately encouraged because a timber buyer maybe can do it a little faster going direct. So that's just something to be mindful of. And I hear those stories very often, whereas it takes a little bit more time when I get involved, but hopefully at the end of the day, you will benefit, the woodlot will benefit, and everyone will be happier. So I just wanted to throw that in there real quick.
Yeah, no, awesome. That's a great way to wrap it up. All right, so how does an overpopulation of deer impact forest regeneration, and what can be done? Jason.
I don't know if Carl wants to take it. I'm sure we can go back and forth, but like, you know, overpopulation depends who you talk to. As a forester, I think we all agree that there are too many deer, especially in southern Michigan. They eat a lot of trees and native shrubs, so that is, you know, the biggest impact that they have in the forest system is eating many generations of young trees. And so that is the problem. What can be done? It's costly. Well, a couple things. Harvesting more deer. That is one way. Although it is, you have to harvest a lot of deer to make a significant impact. There are, similar to agriculture, you know, deer problem permits. I believe different forested settings can fall under those, you know, block type permits with the DNR. And then, you know, tree tubes, tree fencing. I usually like to, when I write a management plan, I throw in a little section on deer exclusions, where you could possibly play with some fenced areas within your woodlot, within and outside of your woodlot. It can be done in grasslands too. Just fenced areas to keep deer and rabbits and other browsing creatures off of the trees and shrubs to see what can come in its place when you remove deer from the equation. So really it's, you know, and I see it as a threat to future forests. If we're doing this cutting and we're not getting acceptable regeneration back, we need to proactive by tree planting and tubing and making reinvesting in the forest where we're not getting that native regeneration.
Great, thank you, Jason. Over to you, Carl.
Jason said it very well. I don't have a lot to add to that. I mean, Jason was talking earlier about harvesting correctly and trying to get regeneration, and then here we have the deer that are, if we are lucky to get it established, taking it all away. So yeah, the fencing and tubing are really important. I think tubing is probably more practical for most landowners because there goes a lot of maintenance into that fencing once it's up in a wooded area. But everybody has their own priorities. So I know exclusion fencing would be probably the best way to do things, but probably not the most practical sometimes.
Great, thank you, Carl. All right. So I'm trying to keep us moving. Next one is, who do you call to determine the health of trees and recommendations for future care and or removal? Josh.
Yeah, I feel like this is probably something Julie and I could talk on. So, but most of the time, depending on it, it could be a certified arborist if you're talking about a singular tree or a small tract of land, or in a larger land, you could be definitely reaching out to Jason or Carl to talk about what's good for their properties there. But most certified arborists or certified foresters are going to have a general decent amount of knowledge on what a healthy tree looks like for that particular species that you're looking for, what the branching structure would look like, what diseases might be there. I know my wife hates going to boardines with me because I tell her every tree that has a problem and why we can't have it, or what insect might eat it, or what deer might do to it. So yeah, so there's those types of knowledge that a certified arborist would be able to tell. and then also just the experience level of working with those plants and how they'll respond to certain things, and making sure that you're not over pruning or over applying an insecticide or a fungicide to a plant, because you still want to have some of that biologic out there as well too, so things stay in control. But yeah, I feel like this could go either way: small tract of land, singular tree or singular shrub, or multiples of those could go to an arborist, and a large tracts of land could be a forester. So but either way, have somebody with the knowledge of the plants talk to you about that, and then you can make your determinations together on what is the best mode of action. Because one thing, as an arborist, we constantly get called out on because trees are too close to the home, right? And that's not always a bad thing. You want plants to be around the home, testfully to protect, from the sun or cast some shade, especially in the summertime. But if left unmaintained, that can become a major issue with either branches falling on home, incorrect. There could be a lean towards the house. I mean, there's all those different types of things that come in there. I know I said that long-winded, but just get someone with the information that knows how that tree should look and what ways there are to maintain it. So.
Great. Thank you, Josh. I can definitely relate with, but you said your wife not wanting to go to a nursery with you. My husband doesn't want to hike with me because I am always pointing out all the different species and trying to ID everything. And it take, a 1 mile hike ends up being multiple hours. Anybody else wants to jump in on this? I think Josh did a good job. All right, we'll keep moving. So actually, this kind of maybe dovetails with what Josh was saying. Do you have recommendations for the best trees to plant around a home in Southeast Michigan? And are there specific trees that should be avoided? Julie.
Wow. So in our industry, we have, a little saying, the right plant in the right place. And so first and foremost, we can't just give a blanket recommendation for a best tree because it depends on your site. What are the soils? What is the exposure? What is the moisture of that soil? Is it dry? Is it, wet? Does it drain well? Does it not? So you have to really analyze the space. How much space do I actually have away from the house, between the house and the sidewalk, etc. So once you've got your space and its characteristics determined, it's at that point you find a tree species that will tolerate and will adapt to those conditions, because it's much easier to match the appropriate species to the existing site conditions than trying to change the site conditions. So can't give one blanket recommendation for a good tree, but there are definitely trees that should be avoided, and that would include any of our calorie pears. They were once the darling of the landscape industry because they had beautiful glossy foliage, a full white flower display in the spring, and they were fruitless back in the day. And then they had gorgeous fall color. So they had all these beautiful characteristics, but they have become fruit bearing and they have become an invasive problem. It's actually illegal to sell them in the state of Ohio, as well as many other states along the eastern seaboard. So if someone even gives you a calorie pear, throw it through the chipper. Don't plant it. The other tree that we have serious disease problems with are our Colorado blue spruce trees. They're not a very sustainable tree in our environment at this time. And then I'd also caution about thinking of that diversity. We're planting, we as a collective industry, a lot of maple trees. And I think we need to be very careful about not going overboard with that species or that genera specifically. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Julie, I'm glad you brought up the blue spruce. We actually had a few people who specifically called out either blue spruce or conifers in general and seeing a lot of issues. And I guess maybe I'm curious if any of you can kind of talk a little bit about what you've seen going on with conifers and blue spruce specifically in Michigan.
Blue spruce have a whole host of problems, fungi specific, related, as long as my arm. So several needle casts, several canker sorts of things. And it's just not sustainable to be trying to spray them to keep them disease free. And the diseases are ubiquitous. The pressure is significant. So it gets to a point where what is actually sustainable, and spraying your trees multiple times every single spring to protect that new foliage, that's challenging at best. So anybody else want to jump in there? Josh, I'm sure you guys deal with a lot of blue spruce.
We do, and that's always a discussion is what's the value of the tree to the property, to the homeowner, right? And we always discuss that this is going to be an ongoing process of treatments, right? You're going to end up doing 3 to 4 applications during the spring through midsummer time frame to protect that new growth. But the instant you stop, then it comes right back. So it's not like you're building anything up for previous years. You can protect, take a year off, and then come back to it, and you've started all over again. So that's the bad thing about it. And my recommendations when it comes to anybody who's looking for an evergreen now is you try and find maybe ones that are maybe less susceptible to those, but it's kind of more of a non-native plant that you're trying to put back into that location. But sometimes people want to be able to have that type of an evergreen look or block something out and not be able to see through that in the winter time. So it is a little bit of a double-edged sword, and one that you kind of have to walk and talk and discuss with the homeowner and let them know the risks that can be associated with planting a Norway spruce or a Serbian spruce or a white or a black hills, something along those lines. But at the end of the day, they're all susceptible. And it's at what point is it tolerable to the homeowner or to a municipality to have that tree and know that in the back of your mind, you're going to have to do some types of treatments in order for it to stay healthy. But it's going to be an ongoing problem. And sometimes the solution isn't for a homeowner to go through and just start cutting them all down, but maybe talking about selectively here, going through and removing a certain number of them throughout the seasons and starting to reestablish some different plant material in the landscape to move in down the road. And like Julie had mentioned too, there is a major issue with the overplanting of maple trees. I mean, you see it in any planting list that you'll have come out, and it'll have 9 to 10 different maple trees, in there. And you worry about that one insect like we had with EAB to come through and wipe it all out. Hopefully, knock on wood, we don't see something like that, but that is always in the back of our minds here, just like what we're starting to see a little bit with boxwoods. And not going down that path, but if you've noticed that's something that's coming up, and we have quarantine areas now for that. So we're kind of our own worst nightmare when it comes to planting at times. So.
But Josh, you brought up a great point, kind of going back to, I think, what Jason started earlier in the talk, diversity. You were saying, maybe selectively thin some of those trees that aren't looking so good and start thinking about the next generation, maybe putting in arborvitae or something else that, doesn't maybe get the same pest pressures as whatever you're taking out. Thank you. That's a good message to send out that, some of these things we might not be able to save, but there are other alternatives, and we can start diversifying so that, if a pest comes in and wipes all of one genre or species out, we have some backups. So those are all good takeaways. All right, so our next slide is all about fruit trees. Where can I learn about fruit tree maintenance and care, and who can treat fruit trees for pests and diseases? Anybody want to take a crack at this one?
That's a tough one, because pruning for fruit trees and pruning for landscape, like individual hardwood trees or even ornamental trees are very, very different. And there's not a lot of specialty in the arboriculture field that know the objectives and goals for fruit tree production. So I saw this as a precursor question and I just kind of scratched my head because there's not a lot of people with that kind of expertise. And I'm wondering if maybe the Michigan State University Extension Service could connect the inquirer of this, you know, fruit tree issue with maybe someone in their local region that could actually handle fruit tree, you know, production. I do know one arborist and I refer stuff to him every single time I get this question. And he's based in Mason, Michigan also.
I'm glad you brought MSU Extension up, Julie. We actually get a lot of requests about fruit trees because we sell them as part of our spring sale. And we actually partnered with MSU Extension to do a fruit tree pruning workshop. I think that was 2 years ago. Is that right, Drew? Okay. But we did record a short video with one of the extension educators, and that is also on our YouTube video. And that really focuses on apple trees. There are different pruning techniques depending, you know, if you have a stone fruit or if you're doing apples but that'll give you kind of a starting point. And then I agree with Julie, MSU Extension is probably the best place to go to get information on fruit trees. And Josh, I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, when you're talking about the fruit trees, and if you're looking for someone to spray the fruit trees for disease to protect against apple scab and all worms and everything else, then you'd be looking for a company, I believe, that would have like that 1C certification. Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's what it is. And most, you know, like Davey, for instance, we can treat with a 3B certification if you're just looking to protect the aesthetics of the plant and you're not going to be consuming the fruit. So that would be a question that you would want to be asking and not just saying, hey, can you treat my fruit tree? Well, yeah, we could treat it, but are you going to consume that fruit? And if that's the case, then I would say not having any, you know, more residential type company to treat the fruit tree. So just something to think about, food for thought.
Yeah, that is a great health and safety point. Thank you, Josh. All right. So the next question, oh, sorry, my cursor has disappeared. There it is. All right. What is a tree inventory and under what circumstances would you need one? Carl?
Sure. So is in forestry, obviously we do tree inventories. We do an inventory for setting up a sale, or if we're doing a timber basis for somebody who just bought a property and needs a inventory and to establish their fair market value of their timber. So if a disaster happened, they might have some potential for recovery of money through insurance, or if they do a timber sale, they can delete that amount and save money on their taxes, those kinds of inventories. I've done a number of inventories on parcels that were going to be developed where they require you to come in and tag the trees and plot the trees and kind of discuss the health of each tree on site, which can be a rather involved in process. Hate pounding nails in trees. That doesn't make sense to me.
Carl, can you break down a tree inventory even further? So is it looking at a single tree and writing down a bunch of different attributes about that tree?
Well, certainly for an inventory like I was just talking about, you have to discuss its health and potentially whether, I mean, if you're out there marking box elder and 4 or 6 inch diameter buckthorn, you're identifying them as either a weed or an invasive. Or if it's an elm tree, it has the potential, you know, you indicate what issues it may have. I mean, for those inventories, it's done in a way that so they're developing the sites, which means they're going to be clearing out a lot of trees. And they're not necessarily just chasing the bad species, because when they're developing a site, usually they're coming in and basically clearing out the interior and leaving a buffer strip around the outside, or maybe a few pockets of trees. So they want to know what you're taking out. Hopefully they're thinking you're going to replace some of that diameter that you took out, and they require that you do that on a lot of these ordinances that I work with. And as far as a timber inventory, you're measuring the diameter and the height, the number of logs, and kind of indicating the quality, if there's veneer there or saw log quality timber.
I
Great,
think
thank you.
Davey does, yeah, an enormous amount of tree inventories. They actually, I think you guys have your own division for that. But inventories are extremely beneficial from even everything from as wide as a municipal scale all the way down to, I do a lot again for smaller properties like cemeteries and golf properties, so that it provide, and the data collected there would usually be species, the size and age, condition, and then what are the needs of that specific individual tree in an arborist context. And again, these would be inventories in managed landscapes. But that provides for allowing for recognizing how to prioritize your work. It allows you to see your species diversification and where you need to improve things. Again, maples tend to be a significant part of many, many urban canopies. It also, when you do inventories, frequently in municipal inventories, they're also documenting the planting sites. So even if there's no tree there, the fact that someone's identified this is a spot that could have a tree is extremely valuable. And often with these municipal scale inventories, they're also doing canopy analyses, which provides a percentage of what the canopy is covering in the various parts of the city or area. And that allows people to prioritize planting in those lesser than canopy covered areas. So many, many values. And as Carl said too, some are simply, hey, we need to inventory the site because we're going to bulldoze them all down and build a warehouse. And those I am involved with too. And it's painful, but those are in order to meet, like Carl said, municipal ordinances, because if you take so many out, you have to replace with so many, and those vary by city.
Great, thank you, Julie. The WCCD had a community tree pilot project where we did look at some tree coverage in canopy analysis in 4 different municipalities. And if anyone's interested, those are up on our website. That's kind of a fun way to check out a little bit of what we're talking about. We didn't do a tree inventory, but we did kind of a higher level analysis using geographic information systems. So I guess in the interest of time, we got 3 more minutes. So let's see if we can get maybe one more in. What is stump grinding, and is it the best way to get rid of tree stumps? How much does it cost? And how else can I keep tree stumps from resprouting? Josh.
Yeah, so stump grinding I've done a lot of it over the years. So it's basically you're bringing in a machine with a spinning head that spins at a high basic resolutions, and you're going to pulverize the stump that is left from a tree removal. And, a lot of times what you're looking to do, especially if it's, they're going to go back with grass in those areas. So you grind out the stump, grind out the rise, ground out the surface roots that are there, maybe haul away the chips, bring in some topsoil, seed in the areas. And for the most part, you won't get a lot of resprouting from those, but you do have some trees that will prolifically sprout. Locust being one of those that will do that, especially if you don't get all of the roots, because there's a bunch of stored energy in those roots, and it's going to try and survive. So it's going to push those things up. So stump grinding is a good way, but it may not be the only way to do it. In certain instances, you could actually pull the stump out, especially if it's a smaller stump, maybe even using a mat axe or something like that. Or if someone has the ability and it's not going to tear up your turf, use a backhoe to pop a stump out of the ground. You could do those as well. And really, stump grinding, it can run anywhere from, you know, $10 an inch up to $20 an inch, depending on what it is that you're looking to do. If it's standard stump grinding, you'd be on the lower end. If you're looking to have more of a restoration done, it's going to be on the higher end. And if you do have some resprouting, you may have to use maybe a more non-selective herbicide to treat those areas to keep that under control, and not just, you know, Roundup. You don't have to use that. There's other ones on the market that you could use as well that'd be a little bit more safer. So.
And Josh, when you mention restoration, are you saying kind of getting it to a state where maybe then you could plant on top of it, or kind of what's the definition of restoration there?
Restoration could be that. It could be actually putting another plant roughly into the same location. You normally don't want to necessarily plant right on top of where another tree was at, but if you're going to maybe offset it, you know, 3, 4, 5 foot one way or the other, that'd be the best thing to do for it. But most restoration would be topsoil seeding the area back in. But yeah, definitely. And I'm not saying that at times you don't try and put a tree back in that same spot. And if that's the case, you're really going to want to grind that area out well, pull out as much of the chips as you can, going 1.5 times the size of the hole. So that way you can put a tree back in that location. We're always going to recommend soil amendments and things like that to try and help that tree get a good jump start back, because the one thing that happens when you do have that decomposition taking place is it gets really warm and sometimes hot, and you can actually burn some of those newer fibrous roots from your new plants coming off. So that's one reason why they say don't plant directly on top of where you've removed. But sometimes you don't have a choice, and they want a tree in the same spot it was at, so you have to try and adapt a little bit. So.
Well, this has been awesome. We are at time. I'm quickly going to scroll through all the things we didn't get to. I'm sorry, everyone, but we tried. There are just so many great questions that came in. So once again, thank you so much, Julie, Jason, Carl, Josh. This was an awesome discussion. I feel like I learned a lot, and it was awesome to hear from all of you. Hopefully you guys got some good ideas going and new connections as well. And I think with that, I'm just gonna give one more kind of plug for the WCCD before we sign off. I just want to remind everyone to check out our upcoming events. So you can go to our website at washtenaw.org to learn more about what we do, to sign up to attend or volunteer our events. And you can always sign up for our monthly e-newsletter, which is the best way to stay in the loop. So with that, thank you again to all of our panelists. Julie, did you have one thing you wanted to add quickly?
Yeah, Drew was putting in some tremendous resources in the chat. How is the best way to get those out?
I think we're going to put them in the, when we put this video up on YouTube, we'll also have the links there in, I guess it's like the notes section. Is that right, Drew?
Yeah, so in the description below the video on YouTube, those links will be provided there. But also, you're welcome to reach out to me or Summer through info@washtenaw.org. Email us, and we'll be happy to send any and all the links to you. That's what conservation districts are for. We try to provide all the resources that you need.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you again, panelists, and thank you, attendees. I hope that you enjoyed it and learned a lot. And that is the end of our webinar. So have a good night, and we'll see you at the next one, hopefully. Goodbye,
Thanks,
all.
Drew.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Nice to see everyone.
Thanks.